Here are some notes regarding the effects of World War II. We'll talk about the conferences during and after the war and a short introduction to the Cold War. So the biggest thing that comes out of World War II is going to be the casualties that are lost. And I have several pictures and graphs to show you. Not pictures, but graphs and charts. But you can see how we have the different countries of the world. They're not split by Axis or allies or anything. But you can see how civilians and citizens is going to be lost mostly by China, followed by the USSR and then Poland. For soldiers, it's going to be the most with the USSR, and then followed by Germany and Japan. And the US, of course, has a small amount of soldier casualties and very, very few citizens. Another way to look at it is through the pie chart with military deaths. Now, this doesn't include any of the civilians. But you can see that of the Allies, the Soviet Union lost the most, China lost second most, and then we have Yugoslavia, United States, Poland, United Kingdom, France, and then the others, which would include like Ottoman Empire and all of those. Or it would be Turkey at that point. With Axis deaths, you can see over here that Germany lost 64% of all of the Axis deaths, and Japan lost about 24%, and then it went smaller into Italy, Romania, Hungary, and Bulgaria. Another way of looking at it is deaths compared to military and civilians, but this time the top part is the Allied forces versus the bottom part of the Axis forces. So you can see how the Soviet Union and China lost the most amount of people, approximately 24 million of Soviets, which was about 12% of their entire population, which was a huge percentage. Mostly lost through the battles within the Soviet Union, as civilians were targeted as well as the military. And then, of course, China had a huge targeting of civilians by the Japanese when they were invaded. And then you can see Poland and Indonesia were also lost a huge amount of civilians, and the Jewish population is included in this chart. Now for conferences, the first conference that we see is met in Tehran between Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill. They're called the Big Three. They're meeting in November of 1943, so it's about halfway through the war, and their decision is to open a Western Front, a spring invasion of France. We had seen fighting through Belgium and France, where France was taken over. We had seen an Eastern Front open between Stalin fighting the Germans on that side, and now Stalin really wants for the Western Front to come in to force Germany to fight on two sides, just like we saw Germany fighting on two sides in World War I. Now, for implications towards the Cold War, we're going to see Soviet and the British American troops decide that they would meet in Germany, and they decide that they are going to partition or divide up Germany after this point as well. Those are going to be two big factors later on. The next conference is again the Big Three, held in Yalta, which is in Crimea, which used to be in Ukraine, but today, in 2015, it is now part of the Russian Federation, or Russia, as we know that Russia has taken over Crimea and is now fighting in eastern Ukraine in this area to take it over, as it is nationally or ethnically very Russian and not as Ukrainian. So in Yalta Conference, they're meeting in February of 1945. We know that Germany is about ready to surrender, and the fragile alliance is starting to come apart as they start to discuss more about terms of treaties. Stalin decides that it will help the United States. They will help the United States after against Japan after Germany has been defeated, and they decide to create the United Nations at Yalta, modeled off of the League of Nations created by Wilson and the United States from the Treaty of Versailles. Now, implications for the Cold War, they decide to divide Germany into 4 zones of occupation, rather than just Russians on one side, the US on the other. Stalin agrees to free elections in Poland, and we know, of course, Stalin keeps all of his promises, right? So, he's going to try and give people in Poland the choice between Communist A and Communist B. The issue of free elections is going to be the first sign of trouble between the United States and the Soviet Union, as Roosevelt really wants to make sure that Poland is going to be given elections and their self-determination. And they actually create the founding documents of the United Nations at this conference as well. So the United Nations is another big effect that comes out of World War II. created to promote international cooperation and achieve peace and stability. They create a Security Council with 5 permanent members: the United States, Great Britain, France, the USSR, and China, which you notice that they are all allied. The power of the Security Council includes the authorization and deployment of United Nations troops, and so every single country within the United Nations will donate troops to be used by the United Nations, which, remember, was a big problem with the League of Nations, that they didn't have that, and so now they're going to create that for the United Nations to work. They are going to mandate ceasefire, have the ability to mandate ceasefire, so stop fighting between 2 groups, and the ability to impose economic sanctions, like we saw recently with the economic sanctions posted on Russia. After they invaded Ukraine and took over Crimea, the UN created economic sanctions on them. We've also seen economic sanctions on Cuba and on North Korea and on other countries that have done things that the United Nations doesn't like. The UN is organized and it has many different branches. Some of the big ones to know about would be the World Trade Organization, also known as the WTO, which promotes a more open global trade system. We also saw the creation of the World Bank, which helped reconstruction of Europe and Japan after World War II. They give out money and things like that, loans. They're not just handing out money, they're handing out loans. Their current focus is on global poverty reduction and economic stabilization. So countries that are not stable and might be going through a recession can get a loan at a very low interest rate through the World Bank. And then we also have the International Monetary Fund, IMF, which oversees the international monetary system, ensuring exchange rate stability. All of these groups are minor branches of the United Nations, similar to how like the Department of State and the Department of Defense are all part of the bureaucracy of the United States government. These are part of the bureaucracy of the United Nations. And there are many others, it's a huge amount, but these are some examples. Now, our last conference, held in Potsdam, Germany, is going to be between the big 3, but unfortunately FDR died in April of 1945. And so the new president, President Truman, is going to be a new member of the big 3, meeting with Churchill and Stalin in July of 1945. Now, the problem is that with the war over officially, at least war with Germany over, Japan has not surrendered yet. The U.S. really wants free elections, which to the Soviets interpret as anti-Soviet and anti-communist elections, and the Soviets, of course, want to make sure that they are protected and that Poland is communist. So that way the Soviet Union will not be invaded anymore by Germany through Poland. So that's going to be one of the big issues that they're going to discuss. Decisions include for the trials to be held for crimes against humanity. For the Holocaust, these will become known as the Nuremberg trials, where they will find prison guards and other high members of the SS and the Nazi elite who are held on trial for the destruction of the Jewish population during the Holocaust. So the biggest thing that comes out of Potsdam is that Truman doesn't like Stalin, Stalin doesn't like Truman, and so we're going to start to see that their views of each other are not well respected, and they don't respect each other. And so there's this Western view that the Soviet Union is trying to spread communism around the world, and the Soviet views the United States as trying to expand capitalism around the world. And so we're going to start to see that because of those two views of each other, they're going to really decide that the other side is not good, and therefore we're going to lead us into to the Cold War, the Soviet versus United States Cold War from all of this. So World War II is over for the most part, but we see that we're setting up the Cold War immediately from that.